So we're all thinking about climate change, right? And how we power everything. It's a huge question.
Absolutely huge.
And for places like Guatemala, Honduras, Costa Rica, well, finding cleaner energy isn't just a nice to have, it feels really urgent now, especially with, recent events showing how much we need reliable power.
Exactly. These countries are really at a critical point. They need to cut emissions, obviously, but also build energy systems that are, well, dependable for everyone.
Which leads us right into our main topic today. We're doing a deep dive into a specific study. It's called a novel geothermal PV-led energy system analysis on the case of the Central American countries, Guatemala, Honduras, and Costa Rica. Bit of a mouthful.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
But it offers a really fresh perspective on how these three specific countries could power themselves in the future.
Okay.
The core idea is building a totally renewable system using mostly solar PV, solar panels and geothermal energy working together.
Okay, let's unpack that a bit because, look, for a lot of you listening, energy stuff can seem complicated, right? Like a maze.
Sure can.
So our goal today is simple. Pull the key ideas from this study, give you the important bits about this potential path without, getting totally bogged down in jargon.
That's the plan. This study gives us a data-driven look at how these countries could use their own natural resources, sun and heat from the earth, for a 100% renewable energy system.
All right, let's start right at the beginning then. Why? Why is it so critical for Guatemala, Honduras, and Costa Rica to make this big switch to renewables?
Well, there are a couple of really big drivers. First, climate change. It's unavoidable. They've signed the Paris Agreement aiming to limit global warming, so getting off fossil fuels. It's just essential for that.
Right. Non-negotiable, really.
Pretty much. And second, it's about energy security. Right now, importing fossil fuels costs a lot. And the prices, well, they go up and down. Renewables offer a path to being more self-sufficient, more stable.
That makes total sense. Environment plus independence. Now, I know they're not starting from zero, right? There's already stuff happening with renewables there.
Oh, definitely, yeah. We're seeing geothermal plants getting built, some pushes for electric vehicles, national decarbonization plans, updated climate promises. Costa Rica is actually a standout.
Yeah.
They're generating almost all their electricity, like 99%, from renewables already.
Mm-hmm.
Guatemala and Honduras are also making progress, around 58% and 55% respectively for their electricity.
Wow, 99% for Costa Rica is impressive. But I also saw in the study material that their overall energy pictures are quite different, not just electricity.
Exactly. That's a key point. Guatemala, for instance, actually produces oil, the most in Central America. Honduras and Costa Rica, they have to import it.
Oh, okay.
And even with good renewable electricity numbers, their total energy use, heating, transport, everything still leans heavily on fossil fuels, especially oil. And also unsustainable biomass like wood for cooking, which is a big issue too. But the study stresses this. These countries are actually in a great position for a full transition. They've got fantastic renewable resources, loads of sun, geothermal potential, and the costs for solar and wind. They keep dropping.
Okay, so the need is clear, the potential is there. Let's get into the core idea of this study then. This novel geothermal PV hybrid approach. What does that actually mean in practice?
It means the system relies mainly on two things working together: solar panels, or PV, and geothermal energy, heat from the earth.
Okay.
And the clever part is how well they complement each other. Solar, well, it works when the sun shines, right, during the day.
Sure.
Geothermal, though, is what we call dispatchable. Think of it as a power source that's just on all the time, day, night, rain, or shine. Reliable.
Ah, I see. So they kind of cover for each other. So what are the big plus points of doing it this way, this hybrid system, according to the study?
The big idea is that this combo could make the whole energy system more affordable and way more stable.
How so?
Well, because geothermal provides that constant, steady power, it could mean you need much less battery storage. Batteries are great, but they're expensive, especially on a massive scale.
Right.
So if geothermal handles that base load, that steady supply, you potentially save a lot on storage costs and boost overall reliability. That's a potential game changer.
That is interesting. Reduces one of the big hurdles for pure solar wind systems. Now, geothermal in Central America specifically, how much potential are we actually talking about? Is it a lot?
It's significant. The region's volcanic, so there's a lot of heat underground. The study estimates the economic potential. What's realistically usable now is maybe 3 to 5 gigawatts, GW.
Okay.
And right now, only about 0.7 gigaW of that is actually developed. Costa Rica is definitely leading the charge in using what they have.
And the other two? Guatemala and Honduras, where were they at, say, a couple of years ago?
Yeah, back in 2020, Costa Rica had 262 megawatts MW installed. Guatemala had about 49 MW, and Honduras around 35 MW. So room to grow. And looking further ahead, the study also mentioned something called enhanced geothermal systems, EGS.
EGS. What's that?
It's basically technology to tap into geothermal resources in places where it wasn't possible before, maybe drilling deeper or stimulating the rock. If that tech pans out, the potential is massive. The study estimates like 81 GW for Guatemala, 45 for Honduras, 85 for Costa Rica by 2050. Huge numbers.
Wow, those are really big figures. But geothermal isn't always easy, is it? I seem to remember reading about challenges.
That's true, yeah. It's not without hurdles. Drilling deep wells is expensive, and you're never 100% sure what you'll find down there, how reliable the reservoir will be.
Okay.
But the study is optimistic that technology will keep improving, making it cheaper and more predictable. And the upside is, once it's running, geothermal is incredibly reliable, versatile, and very low carbon.
All right, makes sense. So the scene is set. Need, potential, the proposed solution. Now, let's get to the heart of it. What did the study actually find? What were the key takeaways?
Okay, so one major finding is, yes, it looks absolutely possible for each of these countries, Guatemala, Honduras, Costa Rica, to become energy self-sufficient with 100% renewables.
Yeah.
Totally doable on their own.
Right.
But the study also highlights that if they connect their grids and work together regionally, there are even bigger benefits. More efficiency, lower costs overall.
Interesting. So going solo works, but teamwork is even better. What else stood out?
Well, the analysis really points to one pathway as being the most cost-effective way to hit net zero emissions by 2050.
Wishes.
It involves going fully renewable, obviously, but also heavily integrating different energy sectors, electricity, heat, transport, and electrifying as much as possible. That's the concepts of sector coupling.
Sector coupling. Right. Maybe quickly explain what that means.
Sure. Think of it like breaking down the walls between energy uses. Instead of burning gas for heat and petrol for cars, you use clean electricity for more things. Powering heat pumps for buildings, charging electric vehicles, you connect it all up.
Gotcha. Using clean electricity across the board.
Exactly. And this study shows that deep integration is really the cheapest way to get fully decarbonized.
Okay. So what does this mean for like the actual power plants and energy produced by 2050? What kind of scale shift are we talking about?
A massive shift. The study projects a huge jump in the total installed electricity capacity by 2050, and the lion's share of that new capacity. Solar PV, somewhere between 56% and 79%. Geothermal makes up a lot of the rest.
Okay. Give us a sense of the numbers.
Okay, so Guatemala, for example, goes from about 3.5 GW installed capacity in 2020 to potentially over 33 GW by 2050. Honduras, from 2.6 GW up to maybe 17 GW. Costa Rica, from 3.6 GW to around 25 GW. Huge increases.
Wow. That's a transformation. And the actual electricity generated.
That grows enormously, too. Guatemala's generation could go from, say, 14 terawatt hours TWH to over 140 TWs by 2050.
Oh.
Honduras from 9 up to 56 TWH. Costa Rica, 11 up to 67 TWH.
Incredible numbers.
And again, the study emphasizes PV and geothermal are the workhorses here.
Mm-hmm.
By 2050, solar could be generating maybe 24% to 62% of the total electricity, depending on the country. And geothermal, anywhere from 24% to almost 70%.
Those figures really paint a picture of a completely different energy landscape. Now, one thing you always hear about with lots of solar and wind is needing storage, right? Batteries. What did the study find there?
That's one of the really interesting findings. Because of the geothermal component, the need for battery storage is actually projected to be pretty low. Only around 2% to 6% of the total electricity demand.
Only 6%? That seems low.
It is, compared to systems relying heavily on just solar and wind. It's because geothermal provides that firm, consistent power, 247. It smooths things out naturally, so you don't need quite as much battery capacity to cover the gaps when the sun isn't shining.
Ah, okay. So the geothermal acts like a kind of built-in stabilizer. That's crucial. Going back to that sector coupling idea, how does that actually play out in heating and transport in this model?
Right. So for heating, instead of burning fossil fuels, the model sees a big shift towards using electricity. By 2050, things like electric heat pumps could be providing, say, 34% up to maybe 75% of the heat needed.
Okay.
Sustainable biomass would likely still play a role, maybe 30%. And they also factor in capturing waste heat from other processes, like making hydrogen.
And transport, that's always a tough one.
Yeah, transport's a big energy user. The study sees decarbonization happening in two ways. One is direct electrification. Think electric cars and trucks.
Right.
The other is indirect electrification. That means using renewable electricity to create clean fuels, so-called e-fuels, like e-hydrogen or e-methane.
E-fuels, for things that are hard to run on batteries.
Exactly. Things like long-haul shipping, aviation, those are tough to electrify directly. So you make liquid or gas fuels using clean electricity. The study projects that as cars become electric and more efficient, road transport's energy share will actually drop. But energy demand for shipping and flying might rise, partly because making those e-fuels takes quite a bit of energy itself.
E-fuels. That technology is still, developing, isn't it? Does the study see a big role for them?
A necessary role, yes.
Yeah.
The study really emphasizes that to get completely off fossil fuels, especially in those hard-to-abate sectors, e-fuels are essential. They see a major ramp-up in producing them starting around 2035.
Okay.
And this leads to a huge drop in needing traditional liquid fuels like gasoline and diesel by 2050.
Yeah.
But it also means serious investment is needed in the tech to make them things like electrolyzers, to make hydrogen, and potentially direct air capture, DAC, to get CO2.
This all sounds, expensive. All these new power plants, electrolyzers. What did the study say about the overall cost?
Well, here's another really positive finding. The study projects that the overall cost of energy, the levelized cost, or LCOE, will actually decrease significantly by 2050.
Decrease?
Yeah, by something like 45% to 58%, mostly because the cost of solar PV and geothermal power is expected to keep falling. The cost of electricity itself could drop by about 80% by 2050 compared to 2020 levels.
Wow, okay. That's a huge potential saving for consumers and businesses. And the environmental impact. We started talking about climate change.
Right. The bottom line there is a massive drop in CO2 emissions, hitting net zero by 2050 in the scenarios they looked at for all three countries.
Net zero, that's the goal.
Exactly. And this shift towards using electricity directly for more things, plus the sector coupling, also makes the whole system much more energy efficient. They also found very little wasted renewable energy, which suggests the system is well balanced.
So cleaner, potentially cheaper, more efficient. Sounds pretty good. Now, this study focused on Guatemala, Honduras, and Costa Rica. Does this geothermal PV idea have legs elsewhere? Could other places use this model?
Yeah, the study definitely suggests so. They argue this approach could be really valuable for other countries with similar conditions, basically. Places in the Sunbelt that also happen to have good geothermal resources underground.
Like where?
They give examples like Indonesia, parts of Australia, Argentina, Brazil, China, Sudan, Ethiopia, Kenya, places with both lots of sun and volcanic activity or geological heat.
Interesting.
They even point to a real-world example already running a hybrid solar geothermal plant in Stillwater, Nevada. So it's not purely theoretical.
Okay, so a potential blueprint. Beyond cutting emissions, what are the other big picture benefits here?
Well, the study really highlights the boost to energy and economic security.
How so?
By relying on domestic sun and heat instead of imported fossil fuels, these countries become less exposed to, volatile global fuel prices. That's huge for economic stability.
Right.
And the mix of steady geothermal and flexible solar provides a really reliable power supply. Environmentally, besides the low emissions, these sources are also pretty resilient to things like droughts, which can be a big problem for hydropower sometimes.
Good point. What about land use and water? Solar farms and geothermal plants take up space, use resources.
They looked at that too. The estimates suggest the land needed for the solar and geothermal development would actually be a pretty small fraction of the total land area in each country.
Okay.
And water use, especially for newer geothermal technologies, is projected to be really minimal compared to, say, the average annual rainfall. So while there are always impacts, they seem manageable in this context according to the study.
Right. Always trade-offs, but manageable ones here, it seems. So, last big question on the findings. What needs to happen to make this vision a reality? What does the study say is required?
It boils down to a few key things. Supportive government policies are critical setting targets, streamlining permits. Strong financial mechanisms are needed, maybe involving international development banks, to help with upfront investment, especially for geothermal exploration.
Makes sense.
And continued technology improvements, particularly for making large-scale geothermal more cost-effective and reliable. They also mention using international standards for resource management and the importance of cooperation.
And you mentioned earlier that regional cooperation, the three countries working together, had benefits.
Yes, exactly. The study ran scenarios both ways, each country going in alone versus connecting their grids. The connected scenario came out ahead.
How?
Basically, if they link up, they can share resources more effectively. It could mean needing less total power capacity built across the region, needing less storage overall, and ultimately significant cost savings compared to everyone building out their own separate, potentially oversized systems.
Okay, better together. So let's try and wrap this up. If you had to give the single most important takeaway from our deep dive into a novel geothermal PV-led energy system analysis on the case of the Central American countries Guatemala, Honduras, and Costa Rica, what would it be?
I think the key takeaway is just how powerful this combination of geothermal and solar PV could be. This study makes a compelling case that it's a viable, cost-effective, and sustainable path for these Central American nations to completely transform their energy systems
Right.
and hit net zero. And maybe just as importantly, it offers a potential blueprint, a really interesting model for other parts of the world facing similar challenges and having similar resources.
And hopefully for all of you listening, this has been a helpful shortcut to understanding this specific approach. We tried to pull out the key insights, some of the surprising bits from a novel geothermal PV-led energy system analysis on the case of the Central American countries Guatemala, Honduras, and Costa Rica without getting lost in the weeds.
Yeah, what's really striking is seeing geothermal positioned not just as a niche player, but potentially as a core partner alongside solar in driving the global energy transition. It changes the conversation a bit.
It really does. So maybe something for you to think about after this. What could hybrid systems like this mean for other regions you know, or even your own community? And, what policies would we actually need to unlock that potential on a bigger scale?
Definitely good questions to ponder. And if this sparked your interest, you might want to check out the full study, a novel geothermal PV-led energy system analysis on the case of the Central American countries, Guatemala, Honduras, and Costa Rica itself, or maybe look into what energy transition plans are happening where you live.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for joining us for this deep dive into a novel geothermal PV-led energy system analysis on the case of the Central American countries, Guatemala, Honduras, and Costa Rica. We really hope you found it useful.